Hey there folks, my name is Gage. I am the owner of Wind's Edge Sharpening, and today I wanted to do a video on what I really wished I had known before starting a sharpening business. This video is going to have a lot of information in it, everything from the hurdles you're going to face, my philosophies, and just what I've learned about some pricing dynamics. It's going to touch on some of the different sharpening methods. It's not going to go into extensive detail on them. There's a lot of videos on the internet already covering those. It's going to talk about different business models. It's going to talk about the placement of your business, what kind of area you're in, what kind of things to be paying attention for with what your market is. And it's also going to be, sharing some of my general philosophy on who should start a sharpening business as well. If you are somebody who's really considering starting a sharpening business, stick around for the whole thing. There's going to be a lot of information there you're going to want to hear. If you are somebody who is just in the early phases of it, still probably a good thing to watch. And if this video comes into the feed of the right person, hopefully I will convince somebody not to start a sharpening business. And I will have spared you a great deal of time, effort, mental strife, and also money, and just things that you are not going to be able to get back. Ultimately, I'm glad I started a sharpening business, but it has not come without its trials and tribulations. So with that, let's kick into motion here. So, a bit about should you start a sharpening business? Should you start a sharpening business? A lot of individuals are going to really hype up this industry, and they're going to talk a lot about the low start. They're going to talk about like low startup costs for a side hustle. They're going to talk about the margins that you can reach with it, and to a certain extent, those are all very true. A person's startup costs can literally be just one of these 1x30s. A person's and gotta keep an eye on my chickens. The wind blew some metal dust in my eye. A person's startup cost can just be buying a decent quality 1x30. And from there, then you're earning real darn good margins on a couple jobs a week, maybe. Maybe you have a restaurant or something, you sharpen for them once a month or something. One of the things you're going to find, though, is that if you are really trying to actually start a legitimate sharpening business, I'm not talking side hustle, all right? If you're just some guy who wants to if you fed into all the web design marketing bros who are trying to get you to subscribe to their Patreon for advice and things like that, or their subscription-based sharpening forum and whatnot, have fun, hang out in your little forum and whatnot. This video is for the person who's trying to say, I am trying to actually make this a legitimate professional endeavor. This is not a side hustle. This is an honest-to-God business that has an EIN number. I file taxes, all of that. This is somebody who is trying to earn a living with their sharpening. And with that in mind, it's really easy to earn a little bit of nice side money with this. It is hard to get consistently booked and earn good money. Good margins are great when you have the volume needed to actually be earning good money in total. But when you're actually doing it and you're only earning a little bit of money here and there, and it's January and the economy in your area comes to a complete grinding halt because you're in the Northwest and you haven't had a customer for a month, and almost every single one of your restaurant accounts has shut down because it's the winter and it's the new year, hard moments. One of the things to keep in mind with all this too, if you start trying to start an honest to God legitimate sharpening business, you're going to face registration fees, insurance, web infrastructure, social media presence. All of this is going to require a great deal of time and effort on your part. All of this is going to also require money, and you aren't going to get that. You can't get that money back. If you start this and it doesn't quite pan out, between all the registration fees for starting up a business and everything, especially if you are in an area like mine where you're right on the border between two states and you have to be playing around with both of them, you can very realistically be sinking $1,000 into this thing just to be able to be legally operating. Now, there is some certain things to keep in mind there. Certain states have gross sales minimums where once you reach a certain threshold, you need to start reporting it. And so as long as you're under that, maybe don't actually be a full-bore official business. One of the hurdles you're going to face is that in order to grow, there's going to be a couple jumping points you're going to have to make. Things like going into a van, commercial automotive space, things like that. All those things that need to be navigated. One of the things that I want to ask with this is, if you are coming into this business and if you're coming into this endeavor, why are you coming into this? Are you somebody who has a working knowledge with edged tools? And I'm not just talking knives. I'm talking if it's shears for like barbers and hairdressers and such, groomers. I am talking about arborists or loggers that are trying to sharpen up their chainsaws and such, or their wood chipper blades. It is way more than just knives. And one of my personal philosophies is that if you are going to start a sharpening business, you should have a professional working knowledge with the tools that you are trying to sharpen. If you do not have that, at the very least, you should have somebody in your immediate circle who is a professional in that field. Maybe you have a friend who's a line cook or a chef or a hairdresser, barber, logger, arborist, etc., landscaper for sharpening of gardening tools and things like that. You need somebody who can give you an actual critique of, does this work in the professional context? Does your edge hold up to the task? Things to think about. If you are somebody who has never sharpened a knife before, and I'm going to use knives a lot as an example because that's what a lot of the videos talk about. Again, lots of things to learn to sharpen. But if you are somebody who has never sharpened before, there are forums that you can look into that you are actually you'll be able to source. I think it's like 50 or it's 100 knives or something, or just bulk beater knives. These are knives for you to practice on and learn how to sharpen on. And one of the big things with this too is that if you don't have the personal desire to just sharpen 100 knives, maybe this isn't a business you should start. Because, and this applies to really any business, whether it's sharpening or whatever have you, if the base endeavor isn't something that calls to you enough that it's something that you kind of just want to do, when you face the hard hurdles and moments that make you wonder, why am I doing this? Why did I go down this path? Remember, things like my joy for sharpening are the thing in the fact that it was just something that I did, are the things that kept me going through that. And if you are just coming into sharpening because you saw some video that talked about really good margins and how it's easy to start up a business in it, you should really, probably one of the best investments you can do is just find out if you even like the act of sharpening. Because if you find it to be tedious and boring and dull, guess what? That's your cue right there. That's your cue right there. If you are just like if you're just like about this from the very beginning and all you want is the money, you are going to hit some kind of roadblock with this thing, and your desire to stick through, your personal drive to stick through this probably isn't going to be there. Just something to be at peace with. One of the things that I will share is that the best sharpeners that I know, they're all people who have a personal connection to the endeavor. One man I know, for the sake of his privacy, I won't share. He's a professional sharpener. I would consider him a mentor within the sharpening industry for me. For him, he had a very stressful job before he was a sharpener. And he would get back from work, and what he found was that sharpening up all the knives for his friends and family was the thing that calmed him. It was an endeavor that he came to. And I know for me, I was sharpening just on my free time. I was sharpening both at work, and I was sharpening just because it was a hobby of mine. Like, it was just something that I did. So if you are somebody who's kind of wired like that, where sharpening is just something that you are kind of itching to do, especially if you have a professional background in it. I was a butcher before this. That you might actually be somebody who should start a sharpening business. I generally speaking operate by the mindset that I kind of like to go by the rule of 100 knives in regards to learning how to sharpen. For the people who are coming into this really darn new to it, or just maybe are just in the exploring phase of, is this something that they can do? 100 knives, 100 knives, 100 knives. Before you get your first okay edge, you're going to get 100 pretty mediocre. You're going to sharpen 100 pretty mediocre knives. Before you get your first like decent quality edge, you're going to get 100 like okay edges. And before you get your first legitimately sharp knife that is just nuts and is the kind of thing that makes you say, wow, that is a crazy sharp knife, you're going to sharpen like 100 good quality. You're going to sharpen 100 like decent good quality edges. Those aren't exact numbers, but it's the basic idea that this is a skill that takes a fair amount of time to develop, and there are certain steps you can do to progress in that, but there is both a skill component and a knowledge component in this. And that just comes with time, and it also comes with having the desire to develop that skill and knowledge set. So, moving on to our next section, growing and starting. This is a relationship-oriented business. I want to use the example of a coffee shop kind of thing. So, coffee shop. Person starts up a coffee shop. If you have the right location, if you have a good location, and you have just even an okay product, it doesn't even have to be good, just an okay coffee, but you have a good location, you can have a little bit of a consistent clientele within a week. Somebody comes by, my girlfriend and I have done it before. We've walked by, we got a coffee in the morning, and she needed a coffee in the afternoon as she walked back by the place. Like, that's how quickly a coffee shop can just generate business. A sharpening business, on the other hand, you do your job right, and you just sharpen for one of your neighbors or just somebody in your area, there's a very realistic chance they might not come back for another 2 years. It takes time. Sharpening businesses take time to develop, and you have to have a good name for yourself. You have to be putting out good work that people respect and gets people to talk about. And the other component too is coming back to that relationship thing. It has to be something that somebody wants to return, somebody thinks about you and wants to return to you after that time. Commercial accounts, restaurant owners, or all the staff and whatnot. you are going to be seeing these people for the next remainder of whatever have you. Anyone who kind of sells you on this thing of sharpening is a quick way to make a nice little bit of money, they're selling you something. A sharpening business takes time. It takes time to get a consistent clientele. It takes time to be consistently booked. It takes time. These things do not happen overnight. Coming back to that theme, have a solid product out of the gate. You do not have to be a master at this, but you do need to be at a minimum level that people are happy with your work, because the last thing you want is to try to enter the market and establish for yourself with the name of people don't really, he doesn't do good work. You don't want that. First impressions kind of linger a little bit, especially when you're starting up a business. Now, let's see here. Ways to grow and start the business, and just some general dynamics to be thinking about. Seasonality. Now, this is going to be a little bit less as you come down into the south, into the southern parts of the United States. And for reference, I'm in the Pacific Northwest of the United States. That's where my reference is largely skewed to, and I'm in a rural adjacent area. Touch on more of that later on in the video. Within that, there's going to be highs and lows. Summers, for us, our population in my area genuinely triples. Tourism comes in, all the winos come out and start drinking like mad and all their stuff. All the adventure sports peoples come out, all the hikers and all the tourists come out. Businesses get way busier. Farmers markets kick into motion. Up in the northern part of the United States, it's pretty darn common for farmers markets to really only be active like 6 months of the year. And for a lot of them, there's really only a 4-month window in which they're really actively moving well. So that's something to keep in mind too, is that there can be some really big highs and lows. Case in point, during the winter, I have a darn good handful of commercial accounts that just straight up shut down during the winter. There's not enough business to support them, so just they just hit the pause button. It is cheaper for them to just straight up eat the overhead cost of renting the building than it is to be staffed and operating. That's how little business can happen in here, at least in my area. So the other component then too, if you want your business to grow, you're going to have to get comfortable with soliciting. If you really want to push your business to grow, soliciting is going to be your best friend. Well, maybe not your best friend, but it's going to make it grow. And it's going to be tough, because that means you have to be a little bit of a salesman. And a lot of us that genuinely got into knife sharpening's kind of a solitary endeavor. You get in, it's kind of this like rhythmic, just personal, just you and your hands kind of thing. Lo and behold, a lot of the really good sharpeners that I know, they aren't big socialites. So if that's you, you don't have to solicit. There's different business models that don't necessitate soliciting. But if you are someone who is doing like mobile sharpening like I am, if you're somebody who's trying to get like commercial accounts to restaurants and things like that, soliciting's almost assuredly is going to be in your path. Technically, I wouldn't have to do soliciting, but my business would not be where it is without it. So that is something to keep in mind. And there's whole videos on how to do like door-to-door sales and things like that. So if you decide to go down the mobile sharpening path, that's something to looking up. Some like door-to-door sales sort of tactics and things like that is something to keep in mind there. When you go open to solicit, one of the things that I would say is cold calling doesn't really work out. Cold calling has really produced nothing for me. Cold calling hasn't really done much anything for me. Just going up and introducing myself, offering free demos of the services, because there's a lot of sharpeners out there. There's a lot of them, and one of the things that's really worked for me has been doing free demos. It's probably been one of the best things, and what I explicitly tell them is nobody likes to pay for something only to find out that they don't like it. And well, most people, and for the most part, here's what I actually say is if I get 1 in 3 individuals or business accounts that I solicit to, if they say yes to a free demo and they get interested in my service, that's a good day. 1 in 3. I'm going to repeat that one more time. 1 in 3. That's a lot of no's. That's more no's than yeses. I mention that because soliciting and all that, it can wear on you. And getting told no when this is something you've invested case in point, me with all of this, you can see all the equipment and such, all this. When you've invested into a good quality workspace and people just don't really care about it, or they're not interested, it's hard not to take it personally. I'm not saying don't solicit. I'm just saying you gotta just know that you're going uphill and be ready for that. And say, okay, be at peace with it. The other thing too that's really important is with these demos is you have to follow up with them. You gotta follow up with them. If you are able to, when you go and you solicit it to somebody, and if they say, hey, not today, but later on, that later on date, try to get that locked into a calendar. Look for a team lead who can then tie you into a manager who can hopefully tie you into an owner, hopefully. One of the things I want to note on all of this, there's sort of a theme I've noticed in my commercial accounts that I have, and that is that they usually have a pretty consistent staff where I see the same staff each time I'm in there, not in the sense that they don't have a high turnover. That's a theme I've noticed, is they don't have a high turnover, and the management is generally speaking easy to reach and get a hold of. If the owners or the managers are never around, and if the staff are mostly teenagers that are being paid minimum wage and such, in my experience, I usually don't get those accounts. It's just a theme I've noticed. Moving on, other ways to grow your business. Advertising. This is something I'm still figuring out. I am not a guy with a marketing background, and for me, social media has been overwhelmingly a miss in my area. What I can say works is Google search engine optimization, SEO, that's its own topic to be Googled and looked into, word of mouth, and then physical, visible signage in good spots. Physical signage, it worked 50 years ago, works today. Good signage is good signage. And then one of the other things that I really wished I had done when I first started this was I wished I had had a good part-time position. Now, when I say part-time, because I was doing a bunch of soliciting, I was doing farmers markets, I was pretty busy with the sharpening business. I'd wished I had been working something around like 30 hours per week, because for a couple of reasons. One of them is it helps keep your lights on. Coming back to the topic of it's really easy to earn a little bit of side money, but to get consistently booked is hard. It's one thing when you're thinking, cool, that was a $50 job and it took me 20 minutes. That's a lot of money. It's another thing when that $50 job is one of 2 or maybe 3 jobs that comes in a week. $50 a couple times a week outside of a normal job, outside of a normal paycheck, rad, cool, nice little cozy chunk of change. $50 to $150 a week, though, when you are trying to make your whole everything operate and go off of that, suddenly that's very little money. things to be aware of. The other dynamic too, and these are things also that I think really apply to anybody who's starting a business, that having some kind of income stream to keep the lights on as you are getting your business going. Whether that means taking your current job and dialing the hours back. I'm really hoping that it's something that it has flexible hours, because you might need them depending on the nature of your sharpening business and how you operate. Or something that is able to shift their schedule with you so that you can prioritize the schedule with your sharpening business. Or just, again, these sort of things apply to really any business owner in general. It also needs to be a good environment. And again, this applies to really anybody in any small business category. Starting a business will test you, and it will push you, and it will make you wonder at moments, why the hell am I doing this? So having a good day job provides a little bit of just breath of fresh air from that. But the other thing too is it's going to help to maintain a positive relationship with your business. If you start your business and it becomes like your sole goal to try to make money through your business, and it's not quite in the stable form that you wanted it to be, that puts a lot of pressure on your business, and it's only going to give you a negative relationship with your business. And if you're doing this right, this is not a get-rich-quick scheme. This is not something you're trying to do for a couple years, especially in a sharpening business. In a rural area like mine, I am not operating on a 5-year timeline. I'm operating on like a 10-year timeline to be trying to get to a stable point. Limitations of having less, population density. If I was in a more urban area, I think most of the urban sharpeners I've chatted with, they said that it took them about 5 years to get stable. I'm not going to say earning good money, but just 5 years to be stable, consistently booked, and just keeping their head above the water. Me being in a more rural area, I am looking at more like a 10-year timeline. Especially since I'm in the Northwest, where not only is there lower population density, but we also have low seasons. We have the big low seasons during the winter, and the main seasons of activity during the summer. So between those two factors, you go into a particularly a northern rural area, and your business is going to take a little bit more time. More on seasonality. We'll touch more on some seasonality and how it affects certain sharpening items too. And to kind of wrap up this little section, to come back to the point, there will be days that make you wonder why you're doing this. And the best and most successful sharpeners that I know are people who didn't learn sharpening, started a business. It was something they just did for themselves. So if you have a good connection to this, it will help it will help keep you going through a lot of this. Or what? Half an hour in, and I'm about halfway through page 2 of 7. Thank you all for being with me here. Now, I want to talk a little bit about some different sharpening methods. Probiotic soda. Yay. I want to talk a little bit about some different sharpening methods. A lot of you guys are probably going to be coming from a stone background. Here's the thing. At some point, pretty much every single professional sharpener has to incorporate some manner of powered system to get through the rough work. And there's a couple different ones of those. You only get a couple knives, you have the time to just like go at a 220 grit or even like a 160 or potentially even a diamond lapping plate for doing major repairs and such, that's fine. But once you are at a notable volume, you will not have the time to be doing that. It's going to take too long to be getting through your rough work. So even the most like thorough stone sharpeners that I know of, what they will acquire is some manner of water-based, so really coarse abrasive system, whether that is a Tormek or whether that is a flat spinning, like I think it's called flat hone, a flat spinning water water disc. I forget what they're called. Popular in Japanese sharpening styles. There's a lot of different methods out there, and I'm not gonna go over, and I'm gonna touch on them. I'm not gonna really talk you through, I'm not gonna like show you a tons of them, partially because I only have so many, and partially also because there's lots of other videos out there. If you're a big whetstone guy, you can do the whetstone sharpening. If you are somebody who's more into the powered system, there's sharpening on belts. There's also systems that use Scotch-Brite wheels. There's the Tormek. There's the Japanese flat hones. There's a lot of different options out there, and at the end of the day, you're gonna have to find the one that works for you. That does a couple things. One, it's kind of a does the shoe fits situation. And two, does it get you the results that you want? Sharpness is a mountain, and there are many ways to climb it. And depending on you as an individual and what you desire in an edge are almost assuredly going to affect what you are looking for. For me, I was a butcher. And because of that, I valued a certain type of edge that was fitted to the task of doing slaughter and skinning and deboning and breaking carcasses and things like that. The other thing too, guys, is that, and women, because there's lots of people getting into sharpening, is that your process is going to change. And that just comes with exploring this. Keeping in mind, and especially going to change as you experiment with like, where are you trying to get to? Because different processes will get you to different places. So some of the options out there, if you're going to try to stick with stones, you have, look, if you're trying to be a stone sharpener, your 220 grit probably isn't going to cut it. You need to get yourself a diamond lapping plate. In fact, I'm actually in the process now of looking into one as I step into the shear side of things. To go back to the practice where I preach thing, I'm looking into being a barber for a couple of reasons, but also stepping into the shear side of things with it all. The diamond lapping plate is going to help level out the stones that I need for working ride lines. Coming back to that topic of the rough stone, you all need to realize that when you get a knife, or really most sharpening items, for the most part, especially with knives, you're going to need to do some repair work. And this is also going to apply to saw blades, whether it's circular or chainsaw. So you are going to need some manner of system in place to speed up your rough work process. That can be a belt grinder. That can be a belt grinder that you move on to doing your stone work with. That can be a diamond lapping plate. It can be a lot of things. It can be a Tormek. It can be a lot of things. Whatever works for you, really, at the end of the day. We're going to talk a little bit about some general knowledge. This is diving into some knives. This is more so focused on knives. So if you're somebody who's looking more into like into sharpening shears or sharpening chainsaws, things like that, you can probably skip ahead through this or linger and watch. Maybe it interests you. Just some general knife knowledge. There's kind of two main. I like to think of it as a sort of like two main knife families. You have Western, and this is more like knife shapes. You have like Western chef knives, you have Western knives, which are more like the chef knife, the serrated bread knife, the Western boning knife, pocket knives, things like that. oftentimes these are going to be stainless steels. Really, honestly, actually, though, the more I look at it, like, ultimately, everything used to be high carbon. For the most part, everything used to be some manner of, like, steel or iron, track your way through the metal, through, like, the historical, like, advancements in metal technology. You will see all of these knife shapes across the whole spectrum of metal qualities. You will see the same way that you will see high carbon steel Western knives. You will also see high carbon steel Japanese knives. You will see stainless steel knives, and you will see stainless steel Western knives. So you'll need to be at least a little bit familiar with the different metal types. If you aren't aware of what HRC is, that's Rockwell hardness. There's some basic metallurgy that a sharpener should know. There's videos on that. If you just type in like knife sharpening metallurgy into Google or YouTube, whatever have you, look up learn what tempering is, learn what quenching, learn basic fundamentals of these things. Knife sharpening at the end, and metal, just all of this in general, it can be as complex as you want to make it, or it can be as simple as you want to make it. Just things to be aware of there. Coming back to the Japanese knife topics. So Japanese knives, there's sort of two things with the Japanese knives. One of them are like true traditional Japanese knives, and the other one are, I'm going to say, like Japanese knives. These are knives that are made with Japanese metals, things like shuns, but they're almost always in Western knife shapes. Like the shun chef knives and things like that. Great knives. Depending on who you are and how into the semantics you want to get, some people would call a shun a Japanese knife. Others would say it's just a Japanese-made knife. It's kind of up to you. But you do need to be aware of these things if you are going to start a sharpening business, because you are going to see a wide variety of knives, and you're going to be across a huge range of quality. And you need to know and have a game plan of how to handle them. And Japanese knives tend to have a lot of single bevel knives. Some of them are single bevel knives that need to be sharpened on stones because they have a hollow ground backside. Others are single bevel knives that can be sharpened on a belt and be treated and you just knock the burr back essentially, and you don't have to worry about any kind of what in a way is kind of a ride line on the back of a single bevel knife. If you think about it, hairdressing shears are really just like two single bevel knives that are sandwiched together. It's kind of funny. In any event, familiarize yourselves with these. And there's lots of YouTube tutorials about the different types of Japanese knives, and you should be familiar with them. A note on these as far as like the really high-end sushi knives and such. For the most part, those the sushi cooks, chefs, they're going to sharpen their knives themselves for the most part. Those knives get kind of esoteric and they get pretty specific, and they tend to be pretty darn expensive. We're talking like easily $600 plus for a knife. It's not at all uncommon for these things to hit $1,000+. It's not uncommon. My point with that being, if you are going to sharpen knives like that, you need to know what the heck you're doing before you sharpen that person's knife, because otherwise you are at best going to have a really miffed customer, and at worst they're going to say, "You owe me a new knife." I don't want that kind of bill. Coming back to the main topic, the necessary knowledge and skills of a successful sharpener. Repairs. For the most part, every single knife is going to need at least some degree of repairs. These are lovely. Examples of these are broken chips along the edge that need to be done. Edges that are edges in a really thick knife that are just like completely blunted and need to be fundamentally restored. Cleaning up rust, scratches, bolster adjustments, things like that. For the most part, every single knife most knives are going to need at least a little bit of repair work, unless you are maintaining them and you're just doing quick little touch-ups on them, which is a thing in more commercial-oriented settings. It's also going to be cleaning up blade profiles. You need a game plan for all of these things. You need to know, like, how are you going to fix and correct swales? How are you going to, which for context, a swale is when a knife edge kind of like it goes straight and then it does this sort of number. And you'll hold it to like a cutting board, and one section of it right through here kind of like does this and doesn't actually make contact with it. Those are swales. Again, cleaning up the profiles of these things. Tips, especially people who use powered systems, it's really common for individuals to instead of having a nice crisp tip. What are you hiding there? Instead of having nice, crisp, clean tips, these things will be sort of elf-shoed, and they'll just be like really curved and blunted. And they'll still be sharp all the way up to the tip, but they're not going to have that little like point there. So be aware of that. Have a game plan for that. Practice those techniques. Practice. You will figure it out with time. Another little component. There we go. Another component is going to be tanto points. A tanto point, it's going to be straight here, and then it's going to basically do this. There. That's better. And it's going to come to a hard corner here, and it's going to come to a hard point there. Trying to do that roughly with my hands. And if you don't maintain the profile there, if you just curve that thing, yeah, it'll be sharp, but the customers will notice. The customers will notice if it is not a true straight line here, straight line, and straight line there. Have a game plan for those. And if you guys get something on your, just to like a little sidetrack here, if you guys are doing this and you get a knife that you don't know how to sharpen, no is your friend. The word no is your friend. In life, in business, in everything, the word no is your friend. The ability to assess if something is within your wheelhouse or if you even want to be doing something or just etc. No is your friend. We've talked about swales, and that is a thing that's more common amongst belt users, and that just comes with practice. I find that using a 2-inch wide belt is a really helpful way to minimize swales. That does not mean that they eliminate swales. There's still a great deal of skill that comes into knowing how to not develop swales. And then the next thing is going to be, we're going to be talking about bevels and edge, a little bit about bevels and edge types. At the end of the day, your bevel, here's what I will say in regards to like my sharpening opinion. Your bevel has to be consistent and your edge has to be deburred properly. Your edge is consistent. Your bevel has been proper. You've properly apexed your knife, or you've apexed the knife and you've properly deburred the knife. Until you have accomplished those three things, discussing what level of polish the knife is at. Is it coarse? Is it fine? Discussing if it is what kind of grind type it is. None of those things matter until the bevel is consistent. The apex of the knife is properly deburred and maintained. That's kind of my thing there. So you get your, so after you've established those, what are some different grind types? We have the concave, here's a flat grind for context. This is a flat grind. It's flat. Just totally straight. Concave, ground on a wheel. Ground on a wheel. It means that what has happened, that the grinder has actually removed metal in sort of a scoop kind of thing. And then you have a convex, which can happen which is more rounded. And convex will happen from either rolling, which can be done either accidentally or intentionally, or it'll come from sharpening on a slack belt. There are differences between the edges in how they function, and they do favor certain things. They do favor certain tasks and certain, I'm not going to say tasks really, they favor certain qualities. But at the end of the day, coming back to the main topic, as long as your bevel is consistent and you have a good clean apex, the bevel, the type of grind isn't actually that crazy important. Just my opinion there. Now, the next thing we're going to chat about is polish, because some people do like to bring these things up to a really high polish. They look all nice and pretty and everything, and really shiny, and people see them and they say, wow, look at that. And then it'll shave hair and whatnot, and it's sharpened like a razor blade. Personally, other people, they leave them really, really darn coarse. By some people's margin, my edges would be considered more coarse. I think more people would consider my edges to be on the toothy side. They'll still shave hair. Hell, they'll even like whittle hair and everything too, just because of the type of edge I produce. Once you realize how nuanced the topic of type of edge comes in, and especially once you start playing around with the belt systems and the sharpening method I've moved to, grit and finish becomes a little more subjective. Some people would call my work more more polished. Other people would call it more coarse. I think I favor a slightly more toothy edge because I was a butcher. And so for me, doing slaughter and all that, I wanted an edge that had just a little bit of tooth to it. I personally have came to and really love something that within the sharpening world, it's called more like a Mexican style edge. It's styled more after the, I believe it is pronounced like afiladores down in Mexico, which, for the record, if you're trying to learn how to sharpen XYZ thing and it's not in English, watch it. At the end of the day, we're all doing the same basic things. We're all just removing metal and then choosing our various method of handling the burr and doing some degree of polishing. I learn a lot by watching sharpeners. I've learned a ton watching sharpeners out in India, watching sharpeners down in Mexico. These guys know a lot, and you can learn a lot from these guys. And then one of the things I will kind of forewarn you guys about is, so coming back to like the polish level discussion kind of thing, the pocket knife guys seem to really want to see that their knives shave. It's just a thing. It's just a thing to be aware of. So if there's any one customer that you're going to like put a little extra polish on, it's probably the pocket knife customer, because they like them. All right. It's just a little thing I've noticed there. Now, one of the hurdles that people find when they start sharpening is they'll run with one of the more common belt progressions is they'll use like a 120 grit ceramic belt to a 400 to 600 grit aluminum oxide belt. And then they will finish it on some kind of polishing compound. And that can produce, that'll produce a really pretty looking edge. It'll produce a very pretty looking edge, but it'll also oftentimes produce an edge that I find is more polished than it should be. And more than anything, what ends up happening is a lot of people, they will in the pursuit of bringing this thing to a nice polish and making this thing shave hair and whatnot, they will ever so slightly round the apex, and yeah, it'll shave hair and whatnot, but it's just gonna slide across tomatoes and bell peppers. It's just it's a thing that'll happen. I'm not super fond of that really polished edge. I've gotten edges using those kinds of methods where the thing, honest to God, actually fell through the tomato. It was actually really interesting. At the same time, though, I prefer more tooth. It's not that I don't want it to be able to fell hairs like treetops and things like that, but I value tooth to an edge because of the tasks that I do. I'm personally of the mindset that the tasks that a very polished edge are better at than a somewhat toothy edge like I produce, the difference in performance is fairly negligible, versus the tasks that a somewhat toothy edge can do better than a very high polished edge. The gap is really big. That is my philosophy there. At the end of the day, though, sharpness is a mountain. Climb it however you choose. That's just my take. And then coming to aesthetics, they should look nice. They should look presentable. Customer likes to see just a little bit of glint there, like that. Your bevel should be consistent. It shouldn't be walking all over the place. Just a nice, presentable product. Serrated knives. If you are going to sharpen, here's the thing. If you don't sharpen serrated knives, you're leaving money on the table. Do you sharpen bread knives is one of the most frequently asked questions I get at farmers markets. And I do. That's what that their little wheel's for. Restoring serrations in particular. There's a couple different ways to sharpen serrations. Some people will use wheels. I use a wheel like this for restoring the serrations. It's a diamond coated wheel. A lot of people will also hit them on the backside of a belt, and that's fine for a couple times. What it ultimately ends up doing is, over time, it will wear away the serrations. It also, unless you're really darn talented and careful with what you're doing there, you're most likely going to grind away all your tips, and at best the thing is going to become more of a wavy serration, and at worst the thing is just going to become kind of straight with just little nubs. I've seen so many guys just destroy serrations, and then the customers will bring them to me. And I bring it back to them. They're like, holy crap, you restored the serrations to them. So serrated knives are great knives to be able to sharpen. Yeah, get outfitted for them. If you are going to sharpen, here's my shtick. If you're going to sharpen serrated knives, get outfitted for them and do a heck of a job on them. There's also some dynamics with hollow bolsters. That's a thing in particularly cheap knives where the bolster, and you'll ting it, and it'll have sort of it's a specific ting, that like sound that it has. You will learn to identify it. And that is a knife that the bolster adjustment can be adjusted just a little. The bolster adjustment can be ground just a little tiny bit before you create a problem. And then if you grind into it, you will have this big gaping hole where the bolster actually is. I, generally speaking, when I get a knife like that, I will chat with a customer about it. It's like, do you want me to sharpen this? Do you want me to do XYZ thing? I let them know about it. When in doubt, don't sharpen it, and chat with a customer about it. It is better to not sharpen something and not create a problem than it is to sharpen something. And yeah, it's better to not sharpen something when you could. Words are hard. No is your friend. You're also going to deal with some really soft metal. I am not one of these guys who thinks every single knife is worth sharpening. I'm not. I'm not one of these guys who thinks every single knife is worth sharpening. Yeah. when I encounter a knife like that, I'll usually just tell that to the customer, and I'll ask, but I phrase the question a little. I'll ask it as, you know, what is your attachment to this knife? Because it might be there, because I've encountered a good handful of people that it was like their grandfather's knife or their grandmother's, something like that. And it's just sort of it's something that they have a personal sense of attachment to. And they say, yes, they want it sharpened because of that. And they understand, and I talk to them and I tell them, it's like, okay, it's not going to get as sharp as other knives, and it's not going to stay as sharp as other knives. That's where I break my rules. It's like, okay, your understanding of this, we've communicated about it, I'm sharpening it for them. Otherwise, though, I'm not fond of sharpening cheap knives for a couple of reasons. One, I think it's distasteful, because if your sharpening service is more expensive than the price of getting a new knife that's at a way better quality, you're just trying to take the person's money at that point, which admittedly we're all here to earn a living. But the other component too is that I view it through the lens that it's just not going to look good on me. It's not. The sharp knife, that knife is not going to get particularly sharp, so the person's more likely to be only so-so about it, and then that knife is only going to stay so sharp. So really what it does is it creates this opportunity for my work to look really poor. So that's one of my personal hang-ups with sharpening really poor quality metal knives. How do you assess a professional edge? This was a question I was once asked at a market. And for me, there's a couple things. It has to perform well. It has to hold up well. It has to look decent. Ultimately, aesthetics it's a tool. That's my perspective. The knife is a tool. Aesthetics are secondary to the function. But, you know, once you've reached good function, you know, make it look nice, make it look presentable. There's nothing wrong with that. And then the other component is timeliness. And this comes in more so with the actual like business owner side of things. What is your process? Is your process flexible? Does your process work well with sharpening a myriad of different items, or do you need to be changing things up constantly? Think about those sort of things. That's more of a business owner kind of perspective there. For me, I came to a process that can handle 9 out of 10 items. I don't have to change the loadout of my setup for like 9 out of 10 items. And there's for a couple reasons. One is I've invested in a good quality equipment. I put a lot of thought into this. And the other thing is just I've practiced it and I've developed skill. Again, those afiladores down in Mexico, they know what they're doing. And you're gonna get, so, and then one other kind of component that I think that a skilled, knowledgeable sharpener should know is how do you handle your off days, your funks. People get in funks. It happens. It happens to the best of us. It happens to every single one of us. And my advice then is, as much as possible, do what works for you, but what has worked for me is, as much as possible, take time off from sharpening. Take as much time off from sharpening as you can. Let your everything's settle as much as your schedule allows. And you'll get in fewer and fewer funks as your process improves, as your skill improves, all of that. Don't get me wrong, you're gonna have days where you're gonna have like kind of off days where your work isn't as good as it normally is. We're human, these things happen. Welcome to life. But knowing how to navigate them. Also knowing how to make it so that your off day, like not as great work, is still good enough to be where you can give it to some random person and they'll say, this thing's crazy wicked sharp. Knowing how to navigate all of that, having game plans for that, being comfortable with it, and also making sure you have the chance to be able to recoup from that. It's one thing when this is a hobby. It's another thing once you're trying to do this for earning a living. Have a game plan. And now, moving on from general knowledge that a knife sharpener should know, It's way more than just knives. It's infinitely more than just knives. It's gardening and it's landscaping equipment. All of like the pruner, all the hand pruners, the hedge loppers and the trimmers. It's medical, veterinary and dental equipment. It's axes and machetes and cleavers. It's circular and chainsaws. It's circular saws, chainsaws. On those notes, those equipment require some specialized equipment to be done in a good and timely manner. And again, coming back to the theme, one of the things that comes with chainsaw sharpening too is that if you're sharpening chainsaws, you're almost assuredly going to be expected to be able to do maintenance on chainsaws as well. This is again one of my kind of rhyme and reasons in him, and one of my like thoughts is that a person should have some working knowledge on this topic. So maybe you're a logger or you're an arborist or something like that. Depending on your area, there could be a ton of work for these, and that extends into like woodworking equipment as well. That's like chisels, that's planer blades, it's all kinds of stuff. Bandsaw blades, even there's ways to sharpen those things too. Here's what I will say about a lot of that equipment. That equipment can be kind of space like bulky, can be. Not all of it is. Then comes shears, which can be fabric and upholstery. People really like the twice as sharp system for that. I think it's completely unnecessary. Totally unnecessary. I'm not fond of it, but I'm also a freehand sharpener, and I have been for a long time. It's just kind of how I'm wired. There are specific things that should not be freehand sharpened. That's more like machining kind of equipment. Again, coming back to like the chainsaw blades, coming back to the circular saw blades, rotating planer blades for like a wood planing machine. Not a freehanding tool. No. That has to be sharpened in a very exact manner. Wood chipper blades, that's coming into more like the commercial and more like the woodworking type of sharpening. I got a little bit off track there, just some. Here's what I will, since I'm on that topic, here's what I will say. Once you start stepping into those kind of things, especially with things like wood planer blades or like industrial paper cutter blades, that's more machining style sharpening, and that's really bulky equipment. There's money in it, but there's space. You have to have a pretty darn specific workspace for that. Just things to be mindful of. Coming back to the shears topic. Hairdressing shears can also be wicked expensive. It is not at all uncommon for people to have $1,000 shears. It's not. So if you are going to sharpen those, you should know what you're talking about. You should know what you're doing. Get equipped for them. A lot of people like to use flat hones for them. That style of thing. What I can say is at the end of the day, I think that a cushioned platen, a cushioned flat hone, a cushion supporting piece to the abrasive makes blending easier, and that's part of making a really pretty aesthetic edge. It also just makes sharpening the shears a little bit easier too in general. Shears are not difficult to sharpen, but they are nuanced and require a fair bit of knowledge to sharpen. They're tricky. And before you start playing around with what is very likely going to be a $1,000 piece of equipment, make sure you know what you're doing, get the training for it, get the right equipment to do the job proper, and get the tools and parts necessary for all the spare parts and repairs that need to be done on those shears. There's a lot of homework to be done on shears. A lot of people also make good money sharpening shears. A lot of people also mess up really expensive shears doing improper sharpening on them. Cross your T's and Q's on that one. There's also clipper blades for like barber clippers, grooming clippers, things like that. My mindset with those are to do those is a pretty darn bulky machine. It's not that it can't be mobile, but it takes up enough of your space that you start to become aspected pretty specifically to the hair side of things. And those ones, more often than not, at the same time, there's a lot of $50 clipper blades out there right now. The days in which like all the wall clipper blades that were only like $25 are, the industry is shifting in a manner where it's not at all uncommon for there to be $50 blades. At the same time, there are $50 blades that maybe it's worth it to be paying extra to be sharpening those. At the same time, the clipper blade industry for barbers and such is moving largely in the direction of disposable, where the whole head assembly comes off, you toss it off, you pop on a new one. And they are not resharpenable. It's a fixed unit. It comes pre-assembled, tied together, or bound together, all that. So if you are going to step into clipper blades, make sure you have the market for it and the space. It's also, and then moving on from the hair side of things, it's also just like tools, like shovels, drywall spatulas, drill bits. The list goes on. It's all over the place. Ice skates for ice skates. If you are in somewhere that ice skating is a big thing, that's another form of sharpening. To kind of wrap this up, the list of items that you don't know how to sharpen will always be bigger than the list of items that you do know how to sharpen. Pick something, get good at it, dial that service in, and then add the next one. Especially in like especially when this is such a relationship and building trust-oriented kind of business. When you launch a service, be confident in it. As confident as you can be, I should say. Moving on from that, we also have the different types of business models. What did I originally say? This video I was hoping it was going to be like, half an hour to 45 minutes. Kudos to you for sticking along. Types of business models. Drop off and pick up. Drop off and pick up. I'm running out of steam. We'll save this for part 2.